Imagine your ex burning your mum alive in front of you. The 999 call from this woman was so horrific that I had to stop listening.
He's here, he's set fire to my mum in the garden!
They had 2 daughters together and lived in Benfleet in Essex. In old family video clips of them together enjoying holidays, they literally just look like a normal family unit. Susan was super close with her parents, especially her mum. Her mum Jennifer was the perfect nan. She literally was so hands-on and she was always spending time with her grandchildren. She also seemed to get on really well with Kieran as well. There was no bad blood in the family at all. Susan had been just 17 when she actually met Kieran initially. He was slightly older and worked as a bricklayer, and to the outside world seemed like a great partner. He doted on Susan and was eager for them to both get married. When they tied the knot and then went on to have kids, he was also the perfect husband and dad and son-in-law. But Susan described him as Jekyll and Hyde. She described feeling embarrassed and not wanting to tell anyone when he gradually became more and more physically abusive. His daughters also noticed how controlling he was with both them and their mum. His behaviour started to escalate. At first it was raising his voice at Susan, then it developed into throwing and smashing things. This was particularly bad when he'd had a drink. He'd then be really regretful the next day and try and just sweep everything under the rug. Then one day, Susan discovered he had a packet of substances in his jean pocket. It was clear he wasn't just abusing alcohol. Now his behaviour then escalated to an alarming degree. He went from pushing her in the chest and holding her throat to holding a knife at her throat. Susan left him shortly after and said she wanted a divorce. She thought he'd handled it pretty well. It kind of seemed like it was amicable. However, it soon became apparent this wasn't the case. When she asked him if he would pay child support, he said he'd rather have her killed. Susan then ended up making a terrified call to police when one day Kieran turned up at her house with a hammer and started smashing up her front garden. Her voice was trembling as he gradually got closer and closer to the door. She was barricaded inside and desperately told the dispatcher that she wasn't able to lock herself in anywhere. Now, police did turn up to the scene and arrest him, but decided to only charge him with criminal damage rather than making threats to kill. The Crown Prosecution Service argued that the text could have just been hypothetical and this was just a breakup despite the fact that he showed up to her house with a hammer. His bail conditions were to not contact Susan. However, he persisted. He really didn't seem to care about this condition. Susan repeatedly reported to police explaining that he was mentally unstable, he was contacting her, but they did nothing. Kieran also called police himself 11 days after being arrested, stating that he was thinking about unaliving himself. By this point, Susan had moved on with a new partner, Mike, and one evening when Susan's partner was at the house alone, he had a horrific shock. He saw Kieran sneak into the garage. He then cut all of the power off to the house before driving off. Police were again informed. Kieran had started calling Susan up to 80 times a day. It was reported, but he was not rearrested as police said it wasn't particularly risky to anyone. They would end up seeing just how risky it was when it was too late. On the 12th of March 2018, Kieran rang the house phone and his daughter answered. He made threats to her that he was going to come to the house and kill her. Police went to Kieran's house, but he wasn't there. The calls continued late into the night, and Susan and the family were understandably terrified. In fear and following police advice, Susan's daughter went to stay at her nan's house. At 2:18 a.m, she rang police to say that her dad was continuously ringing her and harassing her. He left threatening voicemails, but police apparently didn't have a unit available to be dispatched due to competing demands. The following day, Susan went to visit her mum Jennifer and her daughter left for the day, and thank God the daughter left. Susan's mum Jennifer was in the garden and suddenly and unannounced, out of nowhere, Kieran ran into the garden. In an absolutely brutal attack, he threw petrol all over her before setting her alight. Upon seeing the commotion, Susan immediately rang police and started sprinting away from the danger. She was shouting down the phone to police, begging them to hurry, and can be heard on the recording shouting, "Oh my God, my mum's dead. He set fire to my mum in the garden." Like I said, in the end, I did just have to turn the call off because it was just...
He's here, he set fire to my mum in the garden!
Set fire to her?
Set fire to her! She's on fire, please! Help me, for God's sake!
Jennifer had gone up in flames and Kieran had also set himself on fire. Susan was screaming on the phone, begging police to hurry. She could be heard reassuring her mum and trying to get her to kind of hang on to life. When the police asked Susan what's happened to Kieran, she said he's burning to death in the corner of the garden. Jennifer told Susan she loved her, but she had been engulfed in flames and was now completely bald and burnt. She was airlifted to hospital but sadly passed away 17 days later with her family by her side. Kieran passed away that evening. A domestic homicide review criticised the police and said Kieran's behaviour, quote, amounted to stalking and should have been identified and pursued as such by police. An inquest deemed Jennifer's death unlawful, and Susan said, "We miss my mum desperately and just wish things could have been so different to how they turned out."